And one of the reasons why I'd reached out to you and I wanted to do this conversation was I saw that you were one of the first, if not the first, to recently talk about the domestic deployment of the 82nd Airborne. Right. And it just kind of caught me off guard of, wait a second, here's a guy who comes from the special forces and Ranger world. So he has an understanding of how the military works that most don't have. Two, he's got early access or first access to a story that is a pretty big deal for a whole bunch of reasons we get into. And then three was like the mainstream media either hadn't picked it up yet, didn't understand the gravity of the situation or whatever. And so to me, it just like really highlighted like this is kind of the future of a lot of reporting, right? Is more of the independents being able to leverage their personal experiences, their personal networks, and access to information to surface, as you said earlier, like the truth, right? And that's so powerful today. So maybe let's start with just like talk us through kind of that story and kind of how you came across it and why you thought it was important enough to kind of bring it to light on Twitter and elsewhere.
Yeah, sure. You know, they absolutely, with all the recent civil unrest going on in the United States, and we had a protest movement, a peaceful protest movement, and unfortunately, some rioters and some other violent aspects, trying to hijack that movement. And, a heavy police presence getting deployed, the National Guard being deployed, and these are all things that are sort of to be expected, right? And for a governor to deploy the National Guard is perfectly lawful and legal and normal. There's nothing irregular about that. But then when I had a source reach out to me and say that the 82nd Airborne Division's IRF, their immediate response force, had been told to pack their bags and get ready to leave. This was back on Saturday, so 2 Saturdays ago now, that they had been, at least on a self-initiative, they'd been alerted and told to be ready to go. They received the actual alert a few days later on Monday. They were out doing EIB lanes, the Expert Infantry Badge. So they're on Fort Bragg on their base doing normal infantry training, and they get the word that they are being deployed. This is it. They have a CONUS domestic deployment, and MP cars pulled up, blocked off the roads so that they could get right to their station, right to their brigade, draw out all of their gear, throw it on pallets, pack it all, do whatever they had to do, and then get down to Pope Air Force Base. And they were prepped there. And in the early morning hours, it would have been early Tuesday, they flew on helicopters, UH-60 helicopters, Blackhawks, and C-17 transport aircraft, and flew to Joint Base Andrews in the National Capital Region. So as I first learned about this when the initial alert happened on Saturday, I reported it. Then when they actually deployed that early Tuesday morning, I reported on that. And it was kind of shocking that, the rest of the press did not pick up on this story until way later. And I could speculate on why that is. But at the end of the day, you had what is now a very irregular deployment happening. You have active duty paratroopers being deployed ostensibly, for riot control measures on U.S. soil. Now, the 82nd Airborne has been deployed in this sort of capacity in the past, back in like the 1970s. Maybe there was one in the 1980s. But it's sending paratroopers after, protesters or rioters in American cities. It's not something that happens every day. In order to do it, President Trump probably would have had to evoke the 1807 Insurrection Act, which is essentially a loophole to posse comitatus that says in times where there is rebellion and insurrection, where people are having their constitutional rights violated, but the states cannot or will not protect those people's rights, then the federal government can deploy active duty soldiers to try to mitigate that. So in a lot of ways, we walked right up to the brink last week. We walked right up to that line, up to that precipice. The United States military has amazing support from the American public, and like poll after poll, like America loves the military. They love the troops. But the day that we have active duty soldiers in the streets, God forbid, killing people because an altercation erupts between protesters or rioters. And you can just imagine the Wikipedia page on that one in 2030 saying, General Milley presided over the 82nd Airborne Division's deployment to Washington, D.C. during the 2020 riots, where they opened fire on peaceful civil rights demonstrators. Like, they would have said something like that. And I mean, thank God that didn't happen. But we came really close to it this last week.
Yeah, and I think part of my understanding of this, right, is there's kind of multiple stages of importance. So one is just like you described, the deployment of active duty military. A lot of people don't realize the National Guard is not active duty military. It's very much run by the state governors. And so it has kind of a different kind of objective and a different organizational structure. Yes, they have a uniform that looks pretty similar. Yes, they've got guns, like all that kind of stuff, but it is different. To your point, just being deployed is a big step, but two is that deployment has a connotation that comes with it of much more kind of serious clampdown, right, from the federal government. And I think you and I probably both see a situation where like soldiers are Americans first, and they are very much there to kind of protect and serve and want to do the right things, but they also are trained very differently than the police. Right. And so kind of to your point, maybe kind of elaborate on that a little bit of just like, you have probably some of the best training in the world coming from that. It's very different than a 6 week to 6 month kind of police training program. Like, how do you think about that difference?
Yeah, I would point out also, I don't have any critique of the 82nd Airborne Division. I mean, these are good soldiers, and the Immediate Response Force, the IRF, is, it's advertised as America's 911 call, right? The president could call them up and immediately deploy them. They did on New Year's Eve, as tensions were mounting with Iran. They deployed to Iraq. So, I mean, these guys did their job, and they are effective, and the IRF is effective, and it can function in times of emergency. When America needs paratroopers, on target, these guys can do it. The problem in this case is that the 82nd Airborne isn't trained or equipped for riot control. It's not their job. They're paratroopers, they're airborne infantrymen. I mean, think about the guys who jumped into Normandy, right? That's their bread and butter. That's what they do. These guys maneuver and close with and destroy the enemy. As maybe some NCOs might say, they kill people and break things. That's their job. This is the Army. This is what they do. So deploying those same soldiers for a domestic disturbance to do some sort of riot control is very concerning, because you just have soldiers who are wired up. They're looking to fight. This is what they do. And, once one of them gets hit with a brick, you don't really know how quickly that's going to escalate. And what are the force control measures? What are the escalation measures? What's the ROE going to look like? And I can tell you, and I haven't talked about this or written about this anywhere else, but when they deployed the IRF, it was Immediate Response Battalion 1 of the Immediate Response Force. So IRB 1 deployed, Joint Base Andrews, they get there, then they get moved to a gymnasium at Fort Belvoir, and they are sitting on cots, and you had 82nd Airborne paratroopers sitting around discussing with one another the legalities of what they're being asked to do. And they're having conversations about the U.S. Constitution and whether or not this is right or wrong. And I don't fault them for that at all, but I don't think they ever should have been put in that situation in the first place.
Yeah. This is the meat of the conversation, right? In my opinion, which is, let's first talk about ROE, or rules of engagement. One of the things I think I even tweeted it at one point was saying, look, some of the actions that we're seeing from the police would have been illegal or heavily frowned upon when I was in Iraq, right? Yes. The rules of engagement, and one of the situations that I always caveat and say, look, there's incredible complexity. And in today's environment, being a police officer is almost an impossible task, right? Because literally everyone's filming you all the time. Everyone's agitating. Like, there's just so many issues that go on. But I think it was in Louisville, the cops were shot at. So you can imagine you're a police officer, somebody shoots at you. And the way that I've heard the story and kind of what I've read is they basically turned and they shot back. It just happened to be with a group of protesters there. Somebody gets shot and killed. Now, was that the guy who shot them? Was it somebody else? There's a bunch of kind of unknowns. And so it's less about that specific instance as much as if you or I were in Iraq or Afghanistan and we turned and shot back. Yeah, well, if we turned and shot into a group of unarmed people and ended up killing somebody, there's a lot of questions going on. And, in today's day and age, there's actually probably a lot of pressure because there's just a different rules of engagement there, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of different incidents we could go over and bring up where, we've seen on video police, shooting people in the back as they're trying to run away. And it's like, oh my God, if I did that in Iraq, I'd be court-martialed. You're not allowed to do that. This is crazy. And I'm not a law enforcement expert, but I think we have created quite a quagmire in this country. We have these longstanding issues regarding police brutality, but it's not just about policing. It's about the entire legal structure and how it functions in the court system. Things that, should have been fixed a long time ago. And, these institutions, whether it's the police or the military, I think there's a tendency to try to hold everything together with duct tape and, 550 cord rather than, bring forth real policy measures, real legislation, and really, fix the problem.